Hello, everyone. It's Friday night and it's Pontificators night. This is where we talk endlessly about pop culture stuff, comic book stuff, fan stuff, geeky stuff. We talk about everything here, and we usually talk it to death for a few hours. So, with me is Chester Busby the Third. We have Draken, the man known only as Draken, and we have Todd the Wolf, and we have Todd Mulrooney. How are you guys?
We're
Doing
doing
good. Yeah.
Thanks for doxing us all.
Hands up, baby.
No, I'm just kidding.
I exist in
I'm doing fairly good.
I'm wearing my disguise today, Art. I'm Cornelius today. You made a mistake there. You doxed me too.
They're gonna come after you, Todd. Now they know where you live.
Just know that he lives somewhere in the middle of Persia.
They're gonna find you and they're gonna hunt you down. Yeah, because that's what happened to the wolf.
What about the?
Oh, there he goes again. We lost him.
Yes, that's true.
We lost him. Edgar, we lost him.
But you're close to the Wang Hu virus.
The Wuhan virus.
Right?
Wang Hu. There you go. That's racism.
Yes.
Yes, I am, and we lost him. Awesome. Yeah. I don't know if we want to bring up the virus, but if you do, I probably am the most informed person in the community simply because of where I live. But I don't know if we want to talk about that.
Yeah, it's a great way to start the show.
Yeah. Viruses, pandemics. That's
yeah.
So you're dying, huh?
Yeah.
No.
So the topic for today was going to be, it's going to be hard to wrangle everybody. We're all fired up. Is we are going to talk about the basically the ripple effects of certain events in comic books, such as, let's just say, I don't know,
Bendis.
Madness. Well, I mean, just like we could even get into like the seduction of the innocent, Frederick Wortham, the Golden Age, or the Silver Age, I guess, that came out of the Golden Age. Different big like watershed moments in comics history and how they've had ripple effects throughout comic books. And I guess we can get into film and stuff, but there are so many things that have impact on comics over the years. I think this would be a fun topic to talk about and to get into. So,
did McCarthyism impact comics? I know the code came out of it, but did it change like where comics were headed? And
for a while?
No, it really did. Yeah.
Well, you guys want to get into that first? We can do that because I got a little bit to say about that, and it'd be interesting to see what you guys have to say.
Because that would be the very first big thing that might have happened. I know we're here to talk about books that have done something for comics or changed the perception of them or whatever, but that was an event that really did a lot to a lot of different areas, including film and cinema, and the looking for the communists and stuff like that was all part of it, and a lot of people got blackballed. But it did. I know it created the code, but I didn't live the period, so I don't know how it affected the books.
How did McCarthyism create the code?
Well, it came out of that.
They put pressure. Congress put pressure because the mandate was either the government was going to come in and take over, basically, monitor comics and put their own kind of code on it, or that comics could police themselves, basically. So the Comics Code Authority came out of that. So,
but I don't think that's
basically the comics industry policing itself.
But my question is, how did McCarthyism itself do that? Because I thought that was more to do with the seduction of the innocent thing, and that wasn't McCarthyism. That was
I can sum it up for you, Dragon, if you'd like.
I'm just curious because I've never heard that one before.
Oh no, it's very simple. See, every 3 decades or so, we get an onslaught of cackling harpies that come along and want to dictate what you can and can't do, say, think, or love. And this was in the throes of that. So, and we're in the throes of it right now, even. And if you look at it, it is a 3-decade cycle. No.
We're in it right now.
We are in it right now.
So I think it came out of the hysteria, and then, like you said, that Frederick Wortham wrote the book, The Seduction of the Innocent, and then there were all the congressional hearings. But I think the reason that guy even got any traction was because of the McCarthyism and the hysteria that was going on at that time, and so that came out of that. So are we all on the same page as far as the history of the Comics Code and how it came about?
Sure.
More or less, yeah.
I wouldn't say that's the first biggest event, but it is.
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be hard to go chronologically because just unless we were to edit this video and come, have some kind of script, I think it would be hard to do it in order, because if we're going to do it in order, I think really, I mean, other than the invention of comic books and Superman himself, I think the next big one would probably be the Silver Age. But let's talk about the Comics Code first. So, Todd, you seem like you had something to say about it. Why don't you take the floor here?
Well, I know of it and what it represented and stuff like that, but I don't necessarily know what those books were like, and then the changes that happened because of the code. Where were the books headed, and did they reel them back, or were there certain things that were in books for a while, and then they, hey, no, because I know they got rid of smoking in books and stuff like that, but that was way after that. But I'm wondering what was in there that they said, oh boy, we better not put this in there anymore.
It was horror and suspense. Apparently, that's what that's what I've been told. It was horror and suspense, but it was the 50s leading into the 60s. So, and the cool guys like Stan Lee, even, right, smoking whatever they wanted to, creating comics, unfettered.
Yeah, well, keep in mind, if we want to be let's lay out the specifics of the Comics Code Authority to begin with. That came out in 1954, 1953, 54, thank you.
1954,
And this was from an Associated Comics of America, or Comics Magazine Association of America, or something like that. Anyway, it was a regulation that came in, but it was, keep in mind, it was voluntary. It was a suggested code when it initially came in. It wasn't until later.
It was the police itself. Yeah, either that or the government would do it for them.
That's right, and that's how it began. But all the hysteria that was going on at the time, just like it had been in the 30s, late 20s and 30s, we saw the same hysteria coming up in the 50s, which lasted for quite a while. And of course, we do know that Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, and Steve Ditko, when they came out with their comic book company, was standing in the face of the code because they were sick of it. And they were the first to really push hard back against it. Well, maybe not the first, but maybe the most successful. So that's what the Comic Code is coming out of. To keep in mind, I think a lot of people thought it was actually a law, but it's not. It's a suggestion.
Yeah, I don't from my perspective, I think the horror stuff was all dying anyways, so it didn't make really all that big of an impact. Going into it,
it killed a company. It killed DC. I know
for a while, but it was dying. That whole entire genre was already dying. We see that in every single other medium. I think the bigger impact that it had is when the Comics Code was broken, and that inspired the new age of the more hardcore comics and organizing all the comics to be more grown up and more dark and more actually story driven rather than single issue.
I think what happened, the ripple effects from my point of view, is, and I think I remember reading an article where Frank Miller was talking about the comics industry, and he brought up that the decline of the comics industry started with the Comics Code, with the Frederick Wortham Seduction of the Innocent, and that's why we always come back to it, because as far as he's concerned, and I think he's right, I feel the same way, is that the ripple effects were that the industry started running scared and started, instead of writing the stories and telling the stories that they wanted to, they were thinking outside of the creative box to what, and that sounds good though, I shouldn't say it that way, but they were thinking more of like the really conservative viewpoints of the time, how to keep those things in there, how to write stories for children, just like basically getting inside their head and then trying to mandate and police their own publishing companies to reflect that. So I think the purification of each one of the companies not only hurt the creative process, but it also created decades of industry people that were coming in, professionals that were a little less loud and proud, that were a little bit more like in the shadows, and that were hiding and kind of ashamed of comics, because that's what Frederick wanted. He put a shadow of shame across the industry, and the industry has been humbled ever since. And I wish I found the article that I read that Frank was talking about this, but I feel the same way. I think we ran scared. The entire industry did after, the congressional hearings with Frederick and the Seduction of Innocent book that he wrote.
I think at that specific time, like if you were living in that time, yes, it did major harm, but in doing that stuff, they were forced to tell good stories or try to come up with ways to tell good stories within that limitation. And doing that type of stuff actually hones your swords and hones your abilities. And that's why you got that, like how great the 80s and were after that point, and why comics blew up after that, because the 60s and the Comics Code forced them to improve their skills so they didn't have to rely on those things.
No, I disagree. I think the 80s and the 90s, especially the 90s, I think they were going against the code. I think they were starting to push the envelope again.
Oh, yeah.
I think they
the
were
Iron Age. Yeah, the
I
Iron
think
Age.
they were loud and proud. I think that was when the comics, because I was there at that point, that's when we were kind of like, we're going to tell the stories we want to tell. And you can definitely, when we created Image, there was no policing. Image Comics could do whatever they wanted to. There was no code. There was no nothing. There wasn't even a discussion, should we do it or should we not? So I think we, as in, that decade of creators, we were fed up at that point. And then a decade later, it pretty much is gone now.
Right. But that's because the skill was already built up, and that hatred, that oppression was there. You're rejecting that, and then you're building something. And so you have the reintroduction of all those things that you weren't allowed, but you then also had the skills to properly use them too. So that together created that boom, rather than just relying on the horror tactics that are so easy to get over.
I completely disagree. I couldn't be any further in disagreement on this one. All due respect, but the thing is, I think that the industry ran scared for a lot of years, and I think they got inside their own head and we're scared of this type stuff happening again. And then it was inbred in the industry. So the industry became very humble, and the industry became kind of like, more in the shadows and less loud and proud. And I think because of that, you have decades now of grooming talent into being very humble and into being very, very, I don't know any other word for it other than humble. And so they kind of play down their contribution. They play down the stories. They're not really pushing it as much as they once did.
I'm not sure about that today, but so I want to take this back a little bit further because of some of the things that you specifically have said, Art, and that's the aspect of this ripple effect of the Comics Code, of why the Comics Code, because I don't think that it necessarily always has to be the fact that they suspected there was a problem, and Durakan also said something about it there being this story aspect. Well, and being good stories. So what were the stories? What were the kids reading? Kids and teenagers, right? What did they want when they went to the store? What did they have available? And through the 40s, that's the World War II era, and that's where it was basically kind of, it was propaganda, and it fueled the imagination of many people. And heck, the I think military guys even were able to get a hold of them, even across seas. They'd send them, so that they had propaganda, and propaganda can be effective, just like we did. Interestingly enough, we did this on the show before. Is it effective or is it not effective? And I think we came around with the fact that there can be movements that are inspired even by comic books, and because of all media can, and that they knew that, and because they knew that, that's where this happened. So they didn't want this this kind of a new thing to affect kids the way they were affecting them before. Now you had this other thing that was affecting kids, and the stories that the kids want even change because the lifestyle around them changes.
Yeah,
and I think
I'm not sure that they were writing for the kids specifically.
They weren't. They were writing for adults for sure.
Yeah.
Well, right. And that then leads forward. That's what that's where I was going with that. Exactly. And so that moves forward with that, and to where we get the this not just the 60s, but then through the 70s and the 80s, like you were saying, things changed because of the way you wanted to do it. And that's of course that's almost just an opener to this whole ripple effect concept we're talking about tonight, from those early time frames to the next early time frame onto those 70s, 80s, and then the 90s comics, on how each one of them had these waves of differences that happened.
Yeah.
Well, if I could interject, I have no problem with putting a rating system on something that makes it easier for the parent. I have no problem with that whatsoever. But maybe I think the easiest thing for us to do, as far as the code is concerned, why don't we read the code and then see if things are still applied? There's 18 points. I think that's not much. Let's cover it. And I have it right here in front of me, if I may read them. Point number 1: crime shall never be presented in such a way as to create sympathy for the criminal, to promote distrust of the force of law or injustice, or to inspire others with a desire to imitate criminals.
So that's Joker, and
Yep.
Joker does that all the time, and in the movies he does that all the time. He makes the argument that everything is in chaos, so you can't have Joker with that.
But we do.
Yeah.
So therefore, I'm putting an X on that one. It's getting X'd. Next, if crime is depicted, it shall be as a sordid and unpleasant activity.
I don't know. Those villains always had smiles on their face.
Yeah, right. So X
They always
again.
looked like they were having a good ass time.
Right. So that's 2 X's in a row. Let's go to the third one. Policemen, judges, government officials, and respected institutions shall never be presented in such a way as to create disrespect for established authority.
Okay.
All of Batman is gone.
Garth Ennis.
Yeah,
Hands
completely nixed that one.
Right. So that's another X. Number 4, criminals shall not be presented so as to be rendered glamorous or to occupy a position which creates a desire for emulation.
Lex Luthor as president, gone.
Yep, that's an X. All right. We're batting 1,000 here.
And yet, those books that you mentioned, Durakin, those did have comics code, didn't they?
Lex Luthor. No, that's in the.
They were
90s,
breaking their own comic code.
And I'm also seeing a theme here. If you guys aren't noticing it.
Oh, I'm getting the theme.
Batman in the 60s didn't present Gotham City as from. They didn't really present the background story.
See, that's where I was
much.
going to go. Yeah.
See, now number 5 is a big middle finger from me. In every instance, good shall triumph over evil, and the criminal punished for his deeds. Dude, back up! Don't tell me what to write.
Death of Robin
That
is
would be
gone.
really boring.
Right. But it's an X anyway. I mean, as we're going through this, we're seeing that none of these things apply anymore. So, I mean, the code has been blown out. Let me go through here. We don't have to read them all, of course. All lurid, unsavory, gruesome illustrations shall be eliminated. Let me see here. Females shall be drawn realistically without exaggeration of any physical qualities.
Dirty
Nobody
Sounds like the harpies of today, does it not?
Yeah,
Illicit
nobody followed that
wonderful.
even in the day.
Ooh, dude, look, this one's an anti-gay one. Illicit sex relations are neither to be hinted or nor portrayed. Ooh, no gayness. No gayness, Marvel. What are you doing?
No Selena
Nudity with
Kyle.
nudity with meretricious purposes or salacious postures shall not be permitted in the advertising of a product. I don't know why they put that in there. Both meretriciousness simply means to not be salacious. I mean, don't use vulgar or ugly things to promote yourself. If you
I
guys
think they
don't know
just wanted to sound smart by using a lot of multi-syllable words.
maybe. Well, people don't use meretricious very often. Most people would say salacious, right? So I don't know why they put them both in there, but they did. But anyway, I mean, I can read them all if you want, but I don't think we need to. The point of this is this thing is very governmental protectionism. It's very much the thought police telling you what you can think and what you can't. They're telling you exactly what you can and cannot write. It's nonsense. It's nonsense.
It took a lot of years for the industry to get enough balls to actually, get rid of it, though.
But look what it got us. Okay, that was around right 50, 60, 70, the original Fantastic Four, and thereof. I'm just gonna stop right there. And we have some of the greatest, funnest stories. And yes, they were 4-color. They were 2-dimensional, but they really worked hard to deliver some of the most iconic characters that lasted for an entire generation, up until the point where we get some of the more in-depth stories that we ever have, such as the Infinity War throughout the 80s, right?
Yeah, that's true. I wanted to kind of I was looking at years, and I don't know if you guys know. I mean, the reason the Silver Age happened, which is what I want to get into next, is because the Golden Age was dying. So by the mid 50s, the industry was dying. And if you think about the timing, the Silver Age came in at 56, and then Frederick Wertham's book was in 1954. So was there a correlation to comics not selling because of what Frederick did, which harkens back to what I was trying to say, where there was shame attached to comic books. And so I believe it did hurt the sales. And that ripple effects were that people couldn't buy them without feeling like a second, class citizen because of the shame and the shadow that, the seduction of the innocent and the court hearings cast, and then the industry feeling ashamed as well, and then creating stuff more to appease, this imaginary morality. And DeWolf, I agree. I think creativity can exist with any restrictions or with any confines and rules. So you did point out some good examples, but I think overall, I think it did more harm than good, especially when you think about the timing. Like the reason the Silver Age came about, it was mostly DC Comics. That's when the Flash got updated. That's when, Green Lantern got updated, and, basically they went science-based with characters and their powers. So
whereas previously they were magical, and all that magical line became less interesting, I think, and that's why they went science-based, and why they got that boost too.
Science-based is because the world was changing, and science was more topical, and also I think they felt like they had to jazz things up, because I do believe in my heart of hearts that in 54 there was a decline in sales, because if you look at the correlation, the Silver Age was basically, the industry was dying. The Golden Age had served its purpose, but the industry was dying. So the Silver Age in 56 kind of gave it a shot in the arm, and then obviously Stan Lee, Jack Kirby, and Ditko, and those guys took the reins and created the Marvel Universe shortly after that, like 4 years after that, based on the example that DC had put out, and then just topped it. So I don't know. How do you guys feel about that?
Well, I do have an opinion. I think there's more going on as far as that is concerned. You have to keep in mind when you mention magic, for instance, over science. I think the topical aspect is a very important one, and I think Toy Story lays it out very well. It's dealing with the same time period, but keep in mind that during war, religions always have to do a major pushback because a lot of the soldiers and stuff are wavering in their religion because of what they're seeing, and of course the people around them in society are as well. So you always see a big pushback from religion when war is going on. I mean, serious war, right? So you have that effect that is going on from the church, and these pushbacks are that were going on with the 54 code and all the things that were going on with the various trials. It is a pushback to a more conservative religious point of view. And magic was something that they had been pushing against for quite a while, because as far as the Christians are concerned, magic is of the devil. So that aspect is there. So moving over to science, not only was a topical thing, it was also a practical thing to kind of get away from the various harpings of people.
A cult. Yeah.
But I guess Superman was never magic. I guess the only one that really was Green Lantern, right? Of the time.
No, he's
Lantern
divine
was-
magic because he's Moses.
Yeah,
Who
Green
was
Lantern
Superman?
is magic.
I thought Superman had his powers from the get-go because he was an alien and came to.
Oh, Superman has weakness to magic, so yeah.
Yeah, he does have the weakness to magic.
Yeah.
That's-
The
because it's
variation of
evil.
Superman that's magic is Captain Marvel. So
Well, I
and
think-
he's considered kind of not campy, but lame and all like those. So he fell out of
Something though
favor.
that Chester was saying there, though, he kind of glossed through, was society itself. Society itself was this. So you're looking at the comics code now from our perspective. It seems alien, but to them, this was already their way of life. They just wanted to, and I think possibly part of it was to make it more mainstream, to say, hey, there are guidelines to make this kind of polished up, and this is something that kids can read, and they're not going to become delinquents. Ting, right?
I think it did more harm than good. That's my ripple effect, is that it cast a lot of shame on the buyers of the book, of the product, and the creators that were doing the book. And I think the comics code came out of the fear. The industry caved to the fear. I don't think they did it because they wanted to. They didn't self-police. They were in, there was congressional hearings that Frederick Wortham, he had some power behind him. And so I think the industry did it out of fear. I don't think they did it as a marketing or to educate the populace, the reading population or anything like that. I think they did it because they were afraid.
Well,
I definitely think there's a degradation to like everything that has to do with like drawn stuff, like animation and comics. Both had this look after the war. I think people looked at them as degenerative, because if you look at TV shows and movies and everything, every time they present anything with comics, it's always like, you're a loser for reading comics.
Exactly.
Or and you also get this whole fact that comics and cartoons are always looked at as child things, and they're not considered adult
That's
things
true.
anymore.
okay.
Yeah,
Whereas
So
That's a great point, Dragon. You just argued against yourself and won. Dude, claps. Claps, man.
So-
that was brilliant.
So if it's
I'm
seen
agree-
as something bad, right? It's seen as something bad. The trial came up. That was a bad thing, and I'm gonna go with you on this, Art, where it was a detriment, and because of the detriment, the artists themselves kind of agreed to the comics code, and yet they still put out their work, and you'll notice all through the years, then they pushed the envelope of what they could do under that. and they, I mean, constantly, they're right. They're sneaking things in, doing a little bit here, doing a little bit there, seeing what they could get away with, while still maintaining that Comics Code Authority label. And that's almost like the badge saying, yeah, this is still a good, wholesome product, even if they were sneaking some things in, almost like washing the dirt off the kid's face, even though you know he's a brat anyway, you know? So it's possible that also was part of that effect as well.
Yeah, I don't think that it's a bad idea. It's, in the day there was like the Good Housekeeping seal. So
legitimacy.
Yeah, if you had
true.
something, especially like with film has rating, it's a rating system. So then the parent could know what is more appropriate for the child, and so on. But the thing is, my parents never really bought me comics. I mean, I bought my own comics, and even if I begged and borrowed, like, hey, if I'm good in the supermarket, can I have a comic? They didn't pick the book out for me. I went and picked it out myself. So my mom or my dad never really had any idea of what the hell I was reading or what was in the book itself. So I don't know. I mean, these are like rating systems and stuff. Maybe we could do that as another topic at some point, because it does get into a lot of like pros and cons, because there's a lot of like in idea, it's not bad. But the way the Seduction of Innocent and the way it was forced upon the comics industry, I think did cast a shadow on the industry that were still like the ripples that we're still feeling to this day, that the industry's kind of ashamed of itself. And also the sales did drop from the 50s, from the mid 50s, during that time, just before the Silver Age, I guess, was developed or was created. So I think it did hurt sales. I think it shamed people from buying it, and it became less mainstream and more like an underground kind of thing. And I think Frederick did did what he was trying to do, man. I think we're still feeling the effects of it.
Yeah. Well, here I agree with you and Dragon as well, because as a personal experience, when I was a kid, mid 70s, the only reason I had access to comic books because my grandmother would buy me one when we went to the store, because they were on a rack, and my uncle, because he saw that I was reading comic books, he gave me his old collection, which is why I have so many old cool old books. And I had to leave them at my grandmother's house. I couldn't bring them home because my mother would not let those ungodly things in her house, right? So I mean, it's serious. It's a realistic thing that came straight out of those things. It put fear in them. And you got to keep in mind, my mother's generation are the generation who loved John F. Kennedy and thought he was the greatest thing since sliced bread. When, of course, in reality, in hindsight, he's probably one of the worst presidents we've ever had. He was a horrible president. The only reason we remember him fondly is he got shot in the head. Right?
Going back
it's
to
true.
big
I love
ripple
people
event.
that get shot in the head, by the way. That's my
well, people embrace it because of the tragedy. If he had lived, he would be looked upon very poorly. He was a horrible president, dude.
Well, he would have been judged like every other president was judged. You know what I mean?
Yeah. But my point being is that generation, that baby boomer generation, they are the listen and believe generation. They really are. And they are so easily influenced. And later generations kind of push back against that. And then we had a fall back to listen and believe. But now we're seeing the young generation right now is starting to do that pushback as well. So that seems to be cyclical as well. Everything seems to go in cycles, I guess. I don't know.
Going back to the idea of big events that had ripple effects, we've already mentioned it several times. I think the biggest ripple event is probably World War II. Probably. Can you even imagine what the comic industry would be like without World War II? Because I can't.
No,
I can't even
like. That's a good point.
Well,
like nothing I can think of.
Definitely, yeah, superhero comics.
And of course, that World War II probably birthed Disney, if you look at it from that perspective.
Yeah, and even like if you like ignore that, going the effects that Disney had, if we look at that and we go towards the Japanese market, they were highly
Oh.
influenced by the atomic bomb, and
Dude, I
come
have
to the
that
future.
covered. I have
You
that
know-
covered today. I'm prepared for that, dude.
You know, we see it. It's all the anime influencing modern day stuff now, so
Right.
it has like a two-prong attack now on the
Yeah.
influence.
Well, I agree with you. World War II was certainly important, but I would argue that the inception of radio was a bigger effect on comic books because it
have
birthed
that
it.
written down too. Yes. Well, go for it, Chester.
Well, no, I mean, I don't want to step on anyone's toes on it but the thing with radio is radio was, and I've said this before, and I don't know if people truly believe me, but you have to understand that when radio was at its height, there were more radios in houses than we have TVs in people's houses today. It was a higher percentage. I know that's shocking to hear, but it's true. And there has never been a comic book character anywhere near as big as the Shadow. And the reason why he was huge and all the mimics that came out of him, including Batman, was because of radio. People were stuck to that radio during lunch breaks. They were stuck in it in the evenings around that radio listening. Just go watch the Waltons. It's good TV. But seriously, the radio it created comic books. Really.
Yeah,
now, I know a lot of
was-
people will go to the penny dreadful. I get that, and I'm not arguing that. But I would say radio was a much bigger impact on the inception of comics and the future life of comics than World War II was.
Well, if you look at what radio was, like, and how they did that, the radio dramas were small stories that were given,
Yep.
like, periodically, and you would keep on having like a series that would go along, and that's it. Did Holmes come out of that too? Sherlock Holmes, or was that before?
No, that's 19th century.
Yeah, because it's around the same idea that you have those things. Even if Holmes didn't come out of it, radio was more popular than Sherlock Holmes.
Well, the Shadow was supernatural, so Sherlock Holmes.
Yeah, he was.
He's a detective. Yeah.
Sherlock Holmes is 19th century, though. That's it's not really related to. Okay, well, let me get this right.
Well, I mean, in the fact that there was a period piece, not a period piece, but you get periodical installments of a series that became really popular with the radio.
Well,
and
the thing
without that,
is,
you wouldn't have series. in
right? I
comics.
think they kind of they went hand in hand. I think you had radio influencing comics and comics influencing radio, because comics came out in the 30s. I think the Superman radio show was in the 40s. So I do know a lot of the Superman mythology came out of the radio show, was created not in the comic, but was created in the radio show. So
yes, that's true.
there was a lot of influence back and forth. And to this day, if you read older comics, I'm convinced the reason they read kind of weird and awkward is it's a holdover from radio, because old comics would explain kind of the action. It'd be like the Shadow, comes into a darkened room, he opens the door slowly, like that. There would be like a third person narrative that would, explain what he was doing. And I think that's all from radio, because radio didn't have pictures. But I think that comics were a little weird that they did have the images, but they still felt the need to, do those explanations, and it took a while for comics to finally figure out like they shouldn't be doing that anymore. But I do believe that is a holdover from radio, or like a radio influence on comics.
Eric Hawkins said, I'm pretty sure the Hulk is bigger than the Shadow. At the exact same time you were talking about radio dramas, and my mind was like, it'd be funny? Incredible Hulk radio drama.
Oh, like the TV series would totally work, man.
Sure.
Well, no, I mean, like,
David
think
Banner,
about what you would have to do, because you would be just describing how he's smashing things.
Oh, it'd be perfect. No, I'm just saying, like, you would just do it like a TV show where, he's kind of a nomad type character, and he's going from town to town, and he just kind of wants to be left alone, but trouble keeps finding him, and then he has to become the Incredible Hulk. That's a good idea. Let's do that. Let's bring back radio.
we on Fanspeak, we're talking about that, huh, Todd?
Yeah.
Well, you were. Yeah.
Yeah. A year ago, actually. White Mask.
Yeah. So, yeah, I think radio did have a big impact on not just storytelling, but on comics as well. So, does anybody else have something? Well, what do you think the ripple effects are?
From radio?
Yeah, from radio.
Oh, radio gave us comic books, dude. I mean, there were certainly the Penny Dreadfuls and the all the little cheap things people bought by at the pharmacy and stuff. But the radio made it. The consumption became higher and higher, and people wanted more and more Shadow, and everyone and their brother was trying to make something to compete against the Shadow. So it birthed the comic books onto the scene. Right. And you had a lot of people by the end of the 30s or mid to late 30s that were really, really trying to capitalize on the radio success of the Shadow. And of course, this is where we got Batman, Superman, etc., etc. So radio, in my opinion, I know a lot of people like to stick on the Penny Dreadful thing, and I understand the importance of it, but I think radio gave us comic books, not the Penny Dreadful.
Well, let me just
That's
say,
my opinion.
so the golden age was 1930 for comic books. How much sooner does like the Shadow and these type of adventures predate? When, you know what I mean? You know what I'm trying to say? When did they predate? Like, what year did radio come out, and when did these kind of adventure stories start dominating the airwaves?
Well, the Shadow debuted in 1930. So it's definitely a 30 thing. As far as the radio itself, I know the answer to that, but let me make sure I'm not going to be an idiot.
Since you mentioned it, for those of us that don't know what you're talking about, what is Penny Dreadful? Like, explain it.
Sure.
What is the argument with it?
Heinrich Hertz invented the radio in 1886, by the way. Now the Penny Dreadful is a very important thing. It's actually coming out of England. But the Penny Dreadful were these little cheap, really super cheap little small, kind of like just a bunch of paper stapled together or threaded together. And of course, in England, people would buy them just on the street for a penny. Right. In the beginning, they were just little short stories. I mean, although Edgar Allan Poe was certainly a writer who was in the newspaper, as many of them were, it kind of was an akin to the newspaper stories that would come out. And in the beginning, they were just little stories. But of course, advertisers wanted to make more money and wanted to be more successful. So they started putting colorful, not colorful, but artistic covers on them to try to sell them more. And then someone had an idea, well, let me put a few pictures inside as well. So they did that. And then they started competing against each other because it was very, very lucrative market at the time. And they started putting more and more and more pictures. And as time went by, the pictures dominated the interior instead of the story. And the words and stuff were just put in little blurbs on the side or in between the margins and stuff. And then as time further progressed, we get the actual comic book. That's what a Penny Dreadful is.
So, okay, but that being said, like everyone having a radio, they say would be about 1920. Pictures being in the Penny Dreadful, like dominating the Penny Dreadful, happened when?
In the 1890s.
So I think you guys are giving too much credit to radio as far as a balance on this, but that doesn't really matter.
Well, I mean, the first Penny Dreadfuls came out in the 30s, 1830s and 40s, right? And of course, we had the little Western novels that came out of the American West, which was more toward the end of the 19th century. For me, these things were very popular. They were certainly had been around longer than radio, but the radio made it the desire for consumption higher, because the Penny Dreadfuls were certainly powerful and there was an industry there. But after the Shadow became so popular and they started making all those Shadow books and all those other things came out, the sales went through the frickin' roof, dude.
Wait,
okay, but Shadow, you keep bringing up the Shadow, and I'm not a Shadow historian, but I know for a fact that the beginning of Flash Gordon didn't begin on the radio. You know what I mean? It began in print.
Well, also, like the Shadow came out the same year, if it's 1930, as the Golden Age started. So they almost came out like in tandem. Versus, I think they were influenced by each other. But I think if we're going to really have this discussion, we would have to bring in really the first sequential art ever was in newspaper, stories like
for the West. Yeah, that's true.
Yeah. So
how long were the Penny Dreadfuls?
True sequentials came out of comic strips.
Well, the Penny Dreadfuls started around 1830.
No, how long were they?
Oh, they were little teeny short things, short stories, little cheap little things you'd buy for a penny, just sold on the street side or in the pharmacies and things like that. They were
like
very
how many
short.
pages?
Oh, not many, like 10 pages maybe. Some were maybe a little bigger, some were a little smaller. They were cheap little things, and it was just the competitive nature that brought us to a picture book instead of just a little short story you'd read with no pictures at all.
What I'm getting out of that, which I find hilarious, is that essentially you're saying comics came out of light web novels, independent light web novels.
That's essentially. Yeah, you're right.
Well, it depends. It depends because like illustrated books have existed for a long time. Were these true sequentials? Because what makes a comic is the sequential storytelling. So were these panel to panel with word balloons and things like that, or was it just an illustrated novel?
Yeah, well, it became an actual comic book. It started as an illustration is a more modern term, by the way. You should be saying illuminated, but nevertheless, it grew into becoming a comic book.
When did the first 4 panels come out?
Oh, I don't know the answer to that.
The comic strip stuff? Yeah.
Yeah, when was that though?
Like Little Nemo and Slumberland and some of that stuff.
I think that's all dated to about the same era. So it was sort of like a zeitgeist mixing and merging together rather than any one of them being the actual inspiration for it.
Yeah, I don't know. I know that Little Nemo and Slumberland was probably like the biggest, just as far as technical advancement. But there was like Prince Valiant. There were a lot of comic strips like crazy rendered. I think even like Flash Gordon, some of that stuff was in the comic strips. Buck Rogers, those things.
1905.
Central Supervisor says 1905.
No, actually, the first comic strip in a newspaper was in a Swiss newspaper in 1799.
So that was
well. This is amazing and wonderful ripple effects, but I think you've gone way on the deep end. And we need to get a little more shallow over into some rippling areas.
All right, you've talked too much now, Todd. Let's move on.
Thank you,
Yes, we're moving on.
Focus.
Because the ripple effect of whether or not we started drawing in media while telling stories, and that was huge. It gave us comic books, and of course now there's the radio thing. But one thing when did they start putting all the little advertisements? Did advertisements change comics with the grow your strength and wear the girdle and drink your Ovaltine and buy the stuff in the back of the comics? Did that change part of that? Did that have an effect?
I think they probably kept the publishers, in the black, right? It helped their finances, but I don't know.
Oh, yeah. Publishing.
I'm sorry, DeWolf. I wasn't listening. Could you say that again?
No.
Well, how many people actually remember all those? What are they called? The pies, the pie advertisements, like in the 1960s and all like that. There's also the ZR20 or whatever kids.
X-ray glasses?
No, they're the computer kids. The it's a Z something kids that they had their own little mini comic, and then there's the Apple Pie mini comics where Superman is promoting eating the little snack cakes.
Ovaltine.
Yeah, we're kind of getting off
Ovaltine.
track, by the way. Let's
Yeah, we're way
the-
off track. Yeah.
Yeah,
But
yeah.
people
Well, it's-
remember that stuff. So,
Impact.
you
Trying to
know.
figure out how Dragon was going to bring this back into ripple effects.
Right. We're talking about impact of certain things, certain books and events and things that had a ripple effect in comics, right? And you know, I looked through a bunch of people's lists and I found a few books that were common on each list, and I hope we get to those because we're kind of, you
Well,
know,
go ahead, bring up the next
Yeah.
one,
Go ahead.
Todd.
Yeah, each person gets their own, Todd. So go ahead, have your own.
Yeah, Draken had, or DeWolf had advertising.
Yes,
Well,
and I am going to bring you the true history of comic books. You
Oh.
go ahead.
on everyone's list, Moss is on it. Yeah, it's the first graphic novel to win a Pulitzer.
Say it again. Say it again.
Moss,
You mean
Oh,
Mouse?
Mouse.
Oh, Mouse. Okay, Mouse. Okay, the German book. Yeah, okay.
Right. About the cats were the Nazis and the mice
Yeah, yeah, Mouse. Yeah, that's a great book.
were Jewish, right? And it's a tale of survivors and being a child of a survivor and how that affected his growth is basically what the book is about. So that makes every list, and that was by Art Spiegelman, and I think what that book itself birthed was a generation of people who would not get into this industry just because, you know, like they looked at it and go, okay, this might be a place where I can do some of my stories because this is a superhero and sci-fi, you know, genre, you know, like sphere. But wow, what he did is way out of that. So I think what we got were some eclectic cartoonists, some great stories. You guys like Charles Burns, From Hell. You know, I think Spiegelman birthed what I would say is a renaissance of fictional material that you could do in graphic form.
That was in the 90s, right? Or was it before?
No, that was before the 90s.
When did that originally come out? Because I remember it was a blip on my radar in like the early 90s.
I'll check it.
Serialized from 1980 to 1991.
1980. Yeah.
Okay. Oh no, you're right. You're right. Yeah, because that was about the time where we did have a little bit of a renaissance, because that's when you know, Frank Miller really started coming into his own with Dark Knight Returns, and even Alan Moore, right, around that same time.
And that book, what was that? The Drawn and Quarterly book. Remember that? That used to have all kinds of eclectic cartoonists and really different types of stories. And I just think without material like that, you wouldn't have gotten a lot of things done in that format. And I think, you know, and you can't forget people like Robert Crumb and those people that came probably predate that, or even a contract with God. I mean, God, you can't forget that's on a lot of lists, and that is Will Eisner. So those type of things are material that was unlike anything comic book, you know, like what we think of as comics. And it was created. It was created. I mean, some of it predates, like you say, Frank Miller's Dark Knight, and some of it certainly predates Neil Gaiman. And, you know, I think a lot of credit is given to Neil Gaiman for making mature adult stories happen in the comic book format, but I think it goes beyond. It goes way past him. You know?
No, I remember that. And you're right. It was this book was always talked about as like the book at that time, as far as just a game changer.
Right.
And then the rest were the ripple effects, where comics grew up a little bit after this. And so then you did get like Frank Miller's Year One, or not Year One, but Dark Knight Returns. Well, even before that, Ronin. You know, and stuff like that, and then like Watchmen, and then like you said, Neil Gaiman actually was a product of that and came later, a little bit later, but he wasn't, you know, one of the initial guys.
No.
So yeah, you're right.
When did this come out?
1980, I think.
Oh,
Well,
okay.
it said 1980 to 1991. It was like
There we go.
in a
Okay.
comic. So. Yeah, so it wasn't actually a graphic novel until like later.
Well, I
So
think
I'm
Miles
gonna
had an
throw-
effect on a lot of those things that Todd is mentioning, though. I agree.
I'm gonna throw something in here. I think it's connected in what you're talking about, and that's the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
No,
No,
Yes,
not
yes.
even.
not.
Yes.
No, it's
I
not.
stand with Todd,
I
the
can-
wolf, the chairman.
No,
I
I
think it
can
would be
tell
the
you where
polar
it's
opposite of
based.
it. It would be like a cute, like they're animals, yeah. But I think as far as subject matter, no.
No, it's a complete farce, is what it is. It's a parody. Is basically what the what you can give them credit to is an explosion of other parodies. But they don't.
What are you
get any
talking about?
that is not highbrow. That is the
So-
lowest form of
so?
comics going.
Okay, I'm talking about the original TMNT.
Yes.
Yeah, the black and
Didn't
white.
it didn't have any positive ripple effect. It had a parasitic ripple effect.
Okay,
Well,
that
let's-
thing
Wow.
isn't.
Wow.
Yeah,
Those are fighting words, baby.
Yeah,
Oh no!
let's not go there. But you know what? Let it, after we get done with this section, let's go to the Ninja Turtles, because I do think the Ninja Turtles had a ripple, but it effect, but it was more in a commercial. You know what I mean? Because this hit big, man. I remember because my nephew was into Ninja Turtles. There was a whole aisle at Toys R Us, a big aisle for just Ninja Turtle toys. So that was like a huge, like mainstream ripple. But yeah, Art Spiegelman's Mouse definitely, I think, matured and set the groundwork for possibly, works of more adult type works, I guess. Like the Alan Moores and the Frank Millers, to be able to do what they did later.
A lot of people don't know about certain books like, say, Puma Blues or Straight Toasters, because they didn't get the notoriety that something like this did, or that those books were, in my store, because these guys were local, and the goddamn Turtle guys were local, by the way. So I have a lot of history there. But predating Gaiman with very mature stories, there's a ton of material there.
Oh, this way predated Gaiman for sure.
Yeah, but I think the point that I'll let him make his own point. But the point with the Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle, we'll talk about ripple effects, and keep in mind they had to put that initial miniseries out 2-3 times before it hit. I mean, it wasn't an initial mega hit. It didn't. They really had to keep reintroducing.
And I think one of the biggest ripple effects also comes from the Tick that came after that.
Oh, New England comics, baby.
It's black and whites. It's black and whites. It's independence. That time frame of the 80s, right? 70s to 80s was dominated through and through with DC and Marvel.
We're not talking about a story that people go, man, if we didn't have that, what would our society be without?
So I gotta say, based on that, I gotta say Mouse isn't important.
Are you?
Because it wouldn't be important because we would still have all that stuff.
No, it won a Pulitzer. Do you think there's even one good story in any of those turtle books?
I think a lot of people don't read Mouse.
God.
Well, this isn't an either or type of scenario. I think that Mouse did have a ripple effect. I was there when that book was being heralded, and it did have an impact, and it made like Rolling Stone magazine. I mean, there were outside, like, mainstream media that was taking notice of this and writing articles about it. So it did have ripple effects. It might not be in the popular zeitgeist as far as remember and stuff like that, but it definitely did. And it did go hand in hand with what like Moore did and Miller did, and then later what Gaiman did. So I think that there was a whole kind of like a movement towards like young adult comic books about that time, and Vertigo was came out of that as well. So I think that I know I'm trying to connect dots, and maybe I'm not 100%, historically accurate, but I'm just trying to remember what was going on at that time, because I was buying comic books and well into this stuff. I think all those things went hand in hand. So that was definitely kind of a movement to more adult type of comics. I know they probably pre-existed, but in the current ripple effect, I think that it had ripple effects as far as all of the universes, Marvel and DC, kind of going into a more adult area, because people like me, like my generation, and Todd and whoever else is doing comics right now, was heavily influenced by that stuff. And you can still see it's really, for the lack of a better term, it's kind of bastardized. But it definitely has its roots now in contemporary comics, the more adult type of themes, I guess.
But don't you think that stuff would have came about anyways? Like the more adult stuff?
You could say that about anything, but there's still, you could have said somebody was bound to come up with a superhero.
Well, no.
Like Superman.
You were saying that it was all part of a general movement towards the adult stuff. So if that happened at the exact same time, it didn't affect that. It was part of it.
I think it made people realize that the medium had potential for beyond what it was being viewed as.
It inspired people to do
McCarthyism and how they looked at it, and how parents were saying, "You're not going to read that trash," that kind of thing. I think those books like that made it look like, wow, you can use that medium to tell a type of story that is riveting. You know what I mean? It's different.
That's deeper than the norm. Right. I think it did have ripples, and it did affect people. It's just not one of those things that most people remember. But I don't even know what the sales were on this book or how popular it was.
It went beyond people who read graphic novels and comic books and whatever. It went beyond that it was read. Classes were taught about it. It was read in colleges and things like that. It just transcended the medium.
It was carried in bookstores too. I think
right.
It was probably one of the first books that you could find at a normal bookstore, before graphic novels, and that big thing hit later. So I don't know. I mean, I feel like I might be arbiter of this, but I think Todd's right. I think it did have an effect.
May I make an anecdote, please?
No. Mm-hmm. Yes.
Fine. I just want to let you know, Todd. I want to give you an example here. Does everyone remember when April was kidnapped by the Foot Clan, and the Turtles got together desperately to go in and save her? And as they went in to save her, she was able to free herself and join the fight and fight back the Foot Clan. That is empowering, Todd. It is empowering. How dare you stand against women? I call you out, sir.
You get what I mean by it. It doesn't have something where you go, oh God.
But the Turtles are absolutely a ripple effect, dude. There's no way you could say that they're not.
Yeah, it's in
a different way than we're talking about, though.
The way you were talking about,
Yeah, we're just talking about in general,
the industry. Yeah. I think you're right about the commercial aspect of it, but there's no going back in your mind and going, oh, do you remember that arc that was called, the Inn at the End of the World? No.
Well, let's not even go there. Let's just talk about the ripple effects that the Turtles had on comics and the industry. So it sounds like Chester's got some stuff chambered for the Turtles. You want to go in a turtle?
No. That's DeWolf's thing. I'm just backing him up. DeWolf, take it away, sir.
Oh no, man, we triggered
something positive to say about the Turtles, because I will tell you what they were born out of. Something that was a movement, and it was very native to my area. Was
mutagenic goo?
Fanzines. Yeah. They were born out of fanzines.
In the day they were called the Black and Whites. That's
right. So they were a step. They took a step above.
Good on you, Art. That was good. Claps.
Passing around fanzines and made it something that they thought, we think we can get people to buy this.
Yeah, it was a really it was a groundswell movement. that came out of conventions, and it just hit a nerve, because Ninja Turtles was the one that hit big, but there were a whole slew of others. There was
Usagi
Samurai
Yojimbo.
Penguin, and
Usagi
Usagi.
Yojimbo. Usagi
Yeah.
Yojimbo.
Good Zootek.
Fish Police had a cartoon, and I thought Fish Police was nothing but garbage. But
Well, there was a lot of
It
bad
was.
stuff that came out of that,
Yeah.
but it did inspire that, because just a little aside, I remember when Ninja Turtles at San Diego Con was hitting big, and my friend and I went to a party, and it was thrown by Eastman and Laird, and
Lard.
yeah, they had a suite at some like swanky hotel, and those guys were talking about, I just bought a Porsche in cash, and all this other stuff. And this was from the magazine. This was from the comic book.
awesome.
This wasn't even from what came later. So these guys were freaking juggernauts that hit into the main zeitgeist, really, like, beyond anybody's comprehension. And the ripples of what these guys created is still active.
And I think one point we might be missing a little bit. I was kind of thought DeWolf would get on it, but what we know is
You haven't let me get a word in edgewise.
Then get it in, dude. Come on now.
Quiet,
Back
DeWolf,
it up.
quiet.
Tell
You
them how
can't
adult
talk.
it was. Go for it.
I was just being polite, letting you guys talk about it first.
All right, young
but
man.
it
come on.
mainstreamed. It mainstreamed a lot of the fanzine that Art said. I thought he was going to go there, but he didn't quite go over the edge.
That was
Yes,
odd.
fanzines came about, but they also went mainstream. It hit big markets, and also those fanzines learned kind of how to evolve and how to kind of break out from a good story to where they were at, and an interesting idea where they had some fan base, and then explode into the bigger world. And of course, that, funny enough, is even today we're looking back at that saying, how does that happen, and how the local guys do that, and work their little corner of the industry to get into the bigger part of the industry. And I think it's possible because of what you were talking about with Mouse. I think because of the changes in the styling, like they were talking about, the greater adult humor and adult things and high-mindedness, you got the dabbling of different things happening in those fanzines. And I think that kind of rippled from one thing into the next, possibly because you had the X-Men. We're talking 80s, so we're talking Dark Phoenix, Apocalypse, Days of Future Past. These were some of the darker things that they were going through as well.
Well, I wouldn't even go that serious with it. I think where I was going with the ripple effects is just the commercial aspect of what a comic could be and how far you can take it. As far as creating a franchise, like this is one of the, other than Superman, Spider-Man, the big two, I think this was probably the biggest independent of its time to hit in the mainstream the way it did. So the ripples were like just crazy mainstream appeal.
And you can't argue that with if you didn't have TMNT, you wouldn't have like BTAS, Batman the Animated Series, or Superman the Animated Series, or Batman Beyond, or any of those really notable cartoons. I don't think you would have.
There was the Fleischer Superman stuff that predated that.
That even changed.
Yeah, you had
Fleischer
the cartoons, but
Superman didn't fly until Fleischer made Superman.
Right, but in the modern day, a lot of that stuff is based on whether you can sell toys or not. And Superman and Batman and all of them weren't selling all that well of toys, and that's what the TMNT
I see what you mean.
To let BTAS do that.
Yeah, more viable as far as like a child's franchise where you could make a cartoon and toys and stuff. But I think the Batman cartoons and stuff came out of the success of the Tim Burton Batman movie. And that was very commercial in a similar way as the Turtles. So I think as far as franchising the Batman stuff, I think it came out of the Tim Burton movie. Maybe a little bit, they were looking at the Turtles and seeing the success of that. Because how could you not? If you were a licensor, how at that time, how did you not look at the Ninja Turtles? You know what I mean? That thing was massive.
Yeah. Did you see the episode of the Toys That Made Us?
Mm-hmm.
Because they talk all about that stuff.
Yeah,
And you
was
see how much of it wasn't really Peter and Kevin. It was
No, it was the third
guy
dude.
that they hired to go around the world and represent them and get them, and I don't think as a comic and what the comic was and how those turtles looked was a viable look for kids to like. If you look at the original look of them, they weren't.
I will
cute,
give it.
They weren't Disney-esque. They weren't. They were kind of crude and over inked and over rendered and.
Yeah, they definitely commercialized them, for mass appeal, and that's why they had the mass appeal. But the comics definitely inspired that.
Right.
I will give you that the comic itself of TMNT wasn't that big of a ripple effect. But did Metal come out before or after? Because I'm pretty sure Metal probably did have was affected by TMNT's success, wasn't it?
What is Metal? What?
That really popular indie comic type thing. The
I never even heard of it. It was called Metal?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure it's called Metal.
Are you talking about Heavy Metal?
Heavy Metal.
Yeah, Heavy Metal.
Yeah, that's what. All right.
Oh, okay.
Oh, things
Well, that's
change
another
a lot now.
conversation right there. Yeah.
But it's not an either or. I mean, we're just talking about things that have had ripple effects. So we're not talking about what is the best, idea that had, or concept that had the biggest ripple effects, or even in any kind of continuity. We're just kind of coming up with things that have had mass ripple effect.
Yeah, the place where Heavy Metal sits is probably bringing you, being a domestic United States magazine, bringing you European talent that you may have never saw because it didn't reach your comic book stores, but you could see it in Heavy Metal. And that would be one of the big things I would say about Heavy Metal, is what it did. Because there were European artists that you look at and you go, oh my God, this guy's fantastic. This is awesome stuff. And, now all of a sudden you're being introduced to, a better graphic or a painted stories. You know what I mean? We didn't see painted stories until they appeared in Heavy Metal.
Well, Belai and Mobius and those guys, like I'd never seen anything like that before. And after that, it was pretty insane. Yeah, I mean, it did change things for me. I'm trying to, and also it was a magazine. So I don't know, it was a magazine-sized book. So it was sold more like a magazine versus a comic book. So maybe it had ripple effects because it's the first magazine-sized comic I can remember existing.
Yeah, I bought this religiously for like over a decade, man. I loved Heavy Metal.
Yeah, you wouldn't know who Richard Corbin was unless you first saw him here, and then all of a sudden they utilized him in ways in the American market. But the first time
wasn't totally just comics, because it was comics and also just short stories and a lot of things kind of put together, basically with a lot of science fiction behind it, and usually twists and horror as well.
It was more adult. Heavy Metal was definitely more adult. Like there was blood, gore, sex, even nudity.
Oh, this is a Tame cover. This cover's Tame.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. Absolutely. But Heavy Metal was very cool. And El Gargo has mentioned that, and Grant Morrison was the editor-in-chief. Very interesting.
No,
maybe one time. But...
No, I think he bought it in a lot. Yeah, that's why it's gone to shit, by the way. But
well, actually,
bad words, Todd.
He bought it from the Ninja Turtle guy.
Oh, did he? Oh, okay. Yeah, so he's the new. Yeah, he's not the guy from In the Day. when
No.
that magazine rocked. I think that's what Todd was trying to say.
Yeah.
In the day when the magazine rocked. And then there was the cartoon, the really weird Ralph Bakshi type cartoon.
Oh, I know what you're talking about. With Julie Strain flying in and on a.
It was called Heavy Metal. Yeah. And then there was Din. God, what was
Yeah.
the list of-
Din, yeah, there you go.
Yeah. No, that was some great stuff. So maybe as far as ripple effects, maybe Heavy Metal pushed the boundaries as far as what an adult comic could be. You know, just pure entertainment. Because I mean, obviously Europe and places like Europeans are less uptight about, you know, a lot of the sex and more of that type of stuff. So, you know, maybe it was groundbreaking and had ripples just as effects as far as, you know, inspiring and bringing, you know, new ideas to comic books.
Well, it's our Puritan heritage, yeah, for sure.
Yeah,
Hardly any countries on the.
I know it's Den and not Din. I don't know. Richard Corbin, yes.
Yeah, and a lot of those guys that were also part of fanzines, like Von Bodie and stuff, those guys, you know, appeared in Heavy Metal. So Heavy Metal did have some sort of connection to the underground scene of good quality artists. You know what I mean? That might have been doing too much of a mature subject for you to ever see if you didn't see it in something like Heavy Metal.
Yeah, dude, like I did samples and sent them to Heavy Metal before I broke into the mainstream because I loved that book. And also I loved it because it wasn't just pen and ink. Like a lot of that stuff was painted and like there was different styles that were used in different tools as far as the storytelling was concerned. So it was definitely high end. And if you were an artist at that time or aspiring artist, you could not take inspiration from that magazine because it was awesome. Oh yeah. I'm sorry. John Candy was the voice of Din in the cartoon.
Yeah.
But my body.
So can I change this?
Fine. Yes.
So can I alter this a little bit and
Alter
change this
the
over
path.
back to something else? Something more personal on just actual writing in comics themselves and what happens with characters. I think the death of Captain Marvel had a huge effect on things to come.
That was a ripple moment, yeah. I agree.
Whoa, you're good at Todd again.
Todd just hating on you, Todd.
It's Todd action.
Yeah.
Dude, up until that point,
let me see if
you
I
didn't
can
have
search that. Todd on Todd
a
action.
death.
Maybe that make sure.
Todd
Hold on a second.
Two T's.
It was
an anchor character. An anchor character, a mainline character like Captain Marvel, and then they create an event where he dies. Did any other comic book ever do that?
He wasn't that big of a character. Will you quit?
Shut your mouth.
Because he birthed Quasar, and there's some connection there.
Thank you so much.
For shitting on the Wolf's childhood.
I don't want to take away from the event itself because it was a great event. I think Jim Starlin, there's so many stories that he gave us that you wouldn't believe what they've inspired as far as these movies go. And his characters, I think he's very underrated as far as what we're seeing on the screen today. But that you're giving a lot of credit to that event. He wasn't that popular of a character. He was created to.
It doesn't matter if he was popular. It's how things changed, what they were able to do.
Which they did 100 times.
Well, wait. Okay, so the Wolf. Then explain what the ripples were. Then I mean, since we'll let you explain, and we'll see how the ripples affected the industry.
Well, there was a lot of test things that happened out of that later on. We had the death of Superman, right? The breaking of the back of Batman. They tried to do these things later on as well. I think maybe for some more of that advertising thing because of the event that Captain Marvel was. But I think there was maybe a somber tone, a different way of writing that happened throughout the 80s to come, because that was early 80s, 82-ish. And then you had, after that, you had more of the darker, gritty, can characters die? How much peril can we put them in? And do we even kill them off again? I don't think that happened so much before even did DC do it? I don't know. Correct me if I'm wrong. I don't think they did.
Yeah, I don't know. So you're saying like the ripple effects were like that comics kind of started, like mainstream comics, superhero stuff started embracing more of like
Kill 'em
mature.
all.
You can die.
You could die.
He's gonna die, and he dies,
Yeah,
and they
and
do
he
it in a
died.
very somber, adult, if you will,
Yeah,
a mature
and he stayed
manner.
dead.
And he stayed dead. And of course, later on, no other characters kind of had done that to the degree that he did. Well, Carol Danvers, right? Hey, we can now Gwen Stacy. I guess the ripple effects of just the death in comics of characters and how it has affected things. But I think Captain Marvel was one of the first that they decided to go, hey, let's kill someone off.
That'd be interesting to find out what was the first like mainstream hero that was killed off.
Didn't Lone Ranger kill Tonto way before that?
You need to stop. Really? That happened?
Just joking.
No, dude. I do want to give a little quick shout out. It has nothing to do with what we're talking about, but I see we got we have Metal Movies and Brewskis says, "Hail chat." Well, hail you, sir. I was actually watching Razor Fist Metal Mythos on Saxon before I came on this show, sir. So I'm glad I have at least one friend in here.
Yes.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, but notice it was Hail Chat and not Hail Chester.
Oh,
It's okay. He'll get it right eventually.
First major death in comics.
I know, was it?
I'm gonna
The
check.
Three Musketeers.
First.
Well, after
Done.
this, I want to go into, because actually this brought up a good point. I know his name is Ghost in Shell, but what about the Japanese comics and the manga?
Tag me in, Coach.
Okay, well let's find out who died first, and then we'll go into some.
Oh, see the comet. I know. Oh, see, I should have known this. The comet died.
Well, somebody in the chat should know. They should start typing.
Yeah, but people don't know
40s.
that. It didn't have a ripple effect.
That's why I'm saying you're giving way too much credit to.
Well, how do you know it didn't have a ripple effect? Maybe it inspired this death that you're talking about.
Right. I think you're giving.
Because
way
I
too
say so.
That's why.
I'm just playing devil's advocate to Wolf.
The character that died the most was Jean Grey, by the way.
I'll tell you one thing though. When I was a kid, DC was killing every freaking hero on every cover known to man. Like there was always a funeral scene. There was always some kind of death on the cover, which was never done in a story, but the covers there were.
Come on, think really hard. Who died? Very pivotal character to the beginning, like you talk about the Silver Age character, alongside some of your other great characters. Who died first?
Holy shit! I can't
Right.
believe we didn't go with that. Yeah, was it Crisis?
No, the first character. Come on, Human Torch.
Oh, dude.
Oh,
fair point. Fair point. Yeah.
All right.
Take your comments back, DeWolf.
Well,
No, I
Wow.
won't, because they didn't have a funeral.
I'll tell
And
Marty, guys.
Captain Marvel died from cancer.
That's true. That is true, dude.
Himself.
I don't
That
think
he
Captain
gets
Marvel
bonus
died
points
from
for that.
cancer. It just became cancer.
It was space cancer, Dragon.
we did bring up Crisis on Infinite Earths now, so that's another can of worms that we need to get into. But let's go to Japan for a minute, and let's have Chester talk about the influences of manga. We have Akira.
Well,
Big one.
I did want to talk a little bit about manga, if I could, just because we're talking about ripple effects, and manga certainly has an effect on comic books. And I just want to give a little bit of history. A lot of people understand, of course, where comics are, and we talked about it today. And we know the Penny Dreadfuls and radios and all those kind of things like that were part of it. But I don't think people understand where manga comes from. Well, this right here I have on the screen. This is the kanji for manga. Actually, interestingly enough, this kanji means shiki no yukikai. And what that means is a seasonal tourist, I guess. Is that how you'd say it best, baby? Yeah, I
Yeah.
know what it means. But it means like a seasonal tourist. And this is actually from the 12th century. Okay. So manga has been around for 800 years. Keep that in mind. It's not a recent thing. It's not been built off of the American comic books or the European ones. It's a thing unto itself. And of course, manga, and actually it didn't get its actual name manga until about 400 years ago. So it's even been called manga that long. But the things I want to get into with it is that the idea of a little comic strip is how it originally started for just entertainment purposes is how it began. And then in the Edo time, manga became something a little more, because at that time they had a thing called ukiyo-e. And ukiyo-e is basically wood carving things, and what they would use is that they would print off mass amounts of posters to advertise things for like kabuki or whatever. And they were all over the place, and there was a very standard type of printing in Japan at that time. And of course, the comic book or the manga people got into it as well, and it kind of started exploding. But most of the comics we have today, or the manga we have today, of course, are coming after the war, with Sazai-san, of course, and Atomu, or Atomic Boy. But it actually has a very, very long history. Just to kind of give a little thing on what manga is. But for me, I really want to talk a little bit more about the ripple effect on manga itself, and therefore the ripple that manga has had on the West. And of course, that is, hold on a second, can you push that back, please? That is, of course, the legend himself,
Akira Toriyama.
Kurosawa. Yeah.
No.
Now, Kurosawa, of course, he was involved in the movie industry from the 30s, before the war, and he was just built himself up to be an assistant director before the war came out. But after the war, this guy became alive on his own. And of course, he's responsible for what, 20, 30 films, something like that. And I think 30. And during that time, he is considered the greatest Japanese director of all time. But more importantly, most of the techniques you see in today's film come from him. He created most of the filming and cinematographic, wow, that's a hard word, that you see today comes from him, right? And of course, but no, my point is, in Japan, he had an enormous effect on the manga industry with the things he was doing in his movies, and we saw just an explosion.
Influence on comics. I mean, all filmmakers, I would imagine all comic book artists watched, film.
I think that's fair. That's a fair point.
Yeah.
But I was just trying to connect what happened in Japan and then how manga ended up affecting comics directly in America. It was kind of the point I'm making. But you're right. I'm sure he affected everybody. Look how he affected the film industry. But
right now,
you mean like the Magnificent Seven?
Sure, or Yojimbo, or any of the movies he made. But they just the manga, of course, we can't have a conversation about comic books without talking about manga and the effect that they've had. Right. And what I'm saying is, I just want to give a quick little history on manga, just so people would know. But my point is, I think Akira Kurosawa himself is a ripple effect on comics. Is my offer.
And then how did the Japanese comics ripple into like Western and what was their ripple effect?
Star Blazers.
Of course, Yamato with Star Blazers was certainly a big fake. I think a lot of the anime certainly had an effect on things, including into and unto today. But Atomu, the Atomic Boy there, he absolutely had an effect on Western comics at the time. That's a very early comic from the 50s, of course. And as time went by, we're seeing more and more. Akira, Ghost in the Shell, The Wreck of the Lotus War. On and on and on. These things were manga that became anime, and more than likely, the anime affected the American comic book writers more than the manga, possibly. But I'm just saying, all of this is coming out of Kurosawa's vision. right? His ideas. He has been such an influence on the Japanese. It's hard to find a Western example. I mean, can we find a Western example of a director
George
and a
Lucas.
movie maker? That's a good one. There you go. I'll take that.
Because he copied Akira Kurosawa.
Well, he did copy Kurosawa, but it's a fair point, though. Lucas has affected generations. He most certainly has.
What about John Huston?
What about John Ford?
John Ford.
Are you saying that Akira Kurosawa is like the William Shakespeare of the East?
I think so.
Yeah.
Yeah. I think so. Yeah.
So here's where I'm going to butt in and say, because I blurted out Star Blazers earlier, but I think truly it was Harmony Gold who brought us Robotech. And that actually blew up the whole idea of the transforming robot and the space opera and everything else, the dynamics of all the characters involved, of what manga was, what anime was. And that's when kids started going into comic books, even looking for more of that. And you got the Gundam comics and everything else.
I love all that stuff, man.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I think Harmony Gold introduced the English speaker to it in a way that no other thing had before.
Mm-hmm. Now, the chat is giving me a bunch of examples, which is awesome. And I agree with two of them, actually. Hitchcock, for sure, baby. And Spielberg, I agree. I think so as well. Ridley Scott and John Carpenter, I love their stuff, but I don't think they've had anywhere near the kind of influence that Kurosawa has had. But Spielberg and Hitchcock, I would agree. Kubrick, I don't know. What do you guys think about Kubrick?
Yes. Stanley Kubrick.
He would probably be up there higher than Ridley Scott, because I think Ridley Scott was basically a student of Kubrick. Yeah.
What about the guy who directed MASH? He had a big effect on. I forget his name.
Okay.
He always does those ensemble pieces. The what's the one with the war piece he did? I just watched it recently with Robert Redford. They don't win, they lose, but it's about a campaign.
What? And a big thing about Akira and these, which matches these other guys, like Kubrick, is the visual and what it gives you in the storytelling and an emotional inspiration of just how the scene is set up and how you watch that scene play off into the next scene. It's, I mean, you can go on to courses on how to dissect these types of movies, and Akira is one of those.
That's right. Yeah, that's true. And, I thought it was important to mention in today's conversation because, especially today, we know that the comic book industry in America is kind of on its knees right now. In Europe and in Asia, it's flourishing. It's flourishing. And one of the things that's happening in America is we're seeing a huge lean because there's a desire for it. And there's a huge lean toward manga. And manga has become very, very popular, not just anime. Manga is becoming more and more popular in America. And the thing with that is when you look at a lot of the manga or anime, if that's how you're consuming it, it still is being affected by Kurosawa and his ideas and his perception of manliness and righteousness and all those kind of things he just seeped into, but also the human nature that's constantly fighting against these ideals. We see it all the time in manga. It has not gone away. It has not lessened in the least. And right now, more than ever, I would say, manga is affecting America substantially.
And we can take that full circle too.
They have had times, like decades, where they were a big influence. Because when I was doing Adventures of Superman, I can speak of this firsthand. I saw Akira in the theater, and then Marvel started reprinting. I got some of because comic shops started bringing in the imports, but I couldn't read them because they were all in Japanese. And so then Marvel, with the Epic line, started reprinting all of those books. So I got, stuff from there. And then, conventions started bringing more of the manga and stuff. So I started, purchasing like Ghost and Shell. And then there were American companies that were translating it and things like that. But like Lone Wolf and Cub, like a lot of those like even Battle Maiden. Those are some of the big books that artistically had impact on me personally. And then I remember one of the things that kind of what connected Jim Lee and myself is I was bringing those influences in on Adventures of Superman when I was inking over Dan Jurgens. So a lot of those we just called them Akira lines. That's what we were calling them. They're like speed lines, but they're very stylistic and very Japanese. And so I started just bringing that into the work. And so Jim was doing the same, and so was Wills. So there was definitely at that time there was a big influence on from the Japanese comics over into like mainstream Marvel and DC books. So, this is more current history, and now I think you just see an amalgam of all that stuff. It's so like harmoniously put together. You can't even see the influences anymore. Like when we did it, you could see the influences. Because it was just kind of tapped on to like this American like Western look. But now, like you have things that are designed with all those elements in mind. So I do know firsthand that, in my life, that the Japanese comics did have an impact on the industry and had ripple effects.
Yeah.
And we can kind of take some of the reason for the popularity of manga in present day is probably because of the Comics Code Authority, making that degeneration of the comics industry and saying that cartoons and comics were just for children, whereas the manga were for everyone, so they have a stronger base to work with and make them more appealing to everyone.
Yeah. Possibly. Yeah. So, do you guys want to go into Crisis on Infinite Earths? Do you think that had ripple effects, or do you think that was just a publicity stunt to clean house?
Well, it turned into a horrible CW series, so I guess we could talk about it.
I want to talk about Bendis.
Oh my goodness!
I
was joking, but go ahead, Dragon.
No, I'm serious, because without Bendis, you wouldn't have the MCU, the cinematic MCU.
That is the.
Are you serious?
Such a lame.
You wouldn't. All the characters are based on the Ultimate line.
Characters that you could attribute to before he was even born.
All of those characters, all the popularities, all based on.
So young. I can't.
No. I'm not saying you wouldn't have.
Hey, Art, just so you know, I'm keeping a list of things that trigger Todd. I'm writing them down, dude.
Good.
It's up to like 13.
We're doing whole episode
in the MCU cinematic universe predate his ever writing a comic. 90% of that stuff predates him. Are you fucking?
The Spider-Man movies, the X-Men movies, those all predate Bendis.
He was at diapers with some of those.
I understand what you're saying, Todd. I do. I agree on your point you're making, but I think Dragon was trying to make a different point. Let's let him make his point.
Like the entire.
I think I hear what he's trying to say.
The way that the universe is structured in the MCU is mainly based on the Ultimate line. You just can't argue that, and without Bendis, you wouldn't have that. And that says that maybe the Marvel MCU wouldn't be as popular without Bendis's influence there. And therefore, the whole entire thing with the modern superhero revolution in the movie industry probably wouldn't be there.
Well, I'll tell you, you're 100% wrong, because if we were
he didn't even write the Ultimates.
Right. If we were going to go there, we would say Mark Millar or Mark Miller, because Mark Miller has way more influence and sway in Hollywood than Bendis.
I'm kidding. He didn't even write the Ultimates. You bring up Bendis. I can't.
But that's not the formation of the Ultimate Universe. In fact, the Ultimates are kind of shitty written, and they always go against canon, and they're the worst thing of the Ultimate Universe.
You can't give Bendis credit because he created Ultimate Spider-Man. Come on.
But that was the formation of the Ultimate Universe.
It has nothing to do. You haven't seen Miles Morales in the cinema.
Wait. Are you saying you can't give credit to the person who actually created the thing? Because he created the thing.
You wouldn't have the cinematic universe without Bendis, and I'm saying there is probably a tenth of Bendis in any of the cinematic universe.
It doesn't matter. We're talking about ripple effect.
Draken, I'll tell you that you're wrong too, because Bendis didn't create the Ultimate Universe. It was a corporate. It was an idea. He was brought in to write. I mean, he was a very good writer and stuff, but the idea was already on the table because I was there.
What about that? His interpretation of Spider-Man the way that he wrote that Spider-Man storyline.
You mean the Ultimate Spider-Man?
Yeah.
Yeah, but you were talking about that he created the Ultimate line, and I'm just saying that he didn't.
Well, not the Ultimate line in the way that he's the one that mandated it or whatever, but he's the one that came up with that storyline, and that was the inception of that creation.
Yeah, but you said we wouldn't have the cinematic universe.
You wouldn't have it as it is right now, would you?
There's like a so minute amount of Bendis in anything that's happened on cinema. I don't know where you get that comment.
Just remember,
we're talking about ripple effect.
Bendis is so important that he put himself in his own comic book. Just remember that, which I'm showing to the world right now.
Yeah, I don't know if Bendis has had any ripple other than
he's had a ripple.
It hasn't a ripple effect enough to make you hate him.
I just don't give him any credit for anything that I've seen. I don't hate him. I don't actually hate him at all.
Why wouldn't you give him credit for the things that he's done?
I don't think I've seen anything that he's done on the screen that I would say, oh, that's Bendis. If it wasn't for that story he wrote, we wouldn't have had that movie. I haven't seen anything where I would give him that kind of credit.
Yes, but Todd, did you see the Avengers?
Yeah.
He said he's telling you right here. He says, "Did you see the Avengers? He's important."
I wrote it all. I did it all.
Yeah.
I don't know. I think there were other people involved. I think he did write a good Spider-Man. There was a good run there, and I give him a lot of credit, but I don't know if I give him that much credit.
Well, he's a capable writer, but he hates comic books. He hates comic book heroes. So I don't know why he's in the industry, to be honest with you. But then because he fails where people like Garth Ennis, Grant Morrison, Alan Moore, and those kind of Frank Miller even succeed because they all kind of hate superheroes too, right? But they were able to do it in a way that was interesting to get their point, to make whatever point they wanted to make. They got it across in the proper way. Bendis just attacks, tears, and destroys. That's what he does. He's very good at that because he hates comic books. He hates them. So, I mean, he is a failure, in my opinion, compared to those other guys who successfully showed their dislike of the superhero.
Well, that's had a ripple.
What would be other than, like, you know, whether he's a good writer or not? What would the ripple
I think he's a good writer
of Bendis's contribution to comics? What would that be?
I don't have. I don't. That Dragon's going to have to take that because I don't agree with him. I don't think Bendis has had any effect at all. I think those other guys I mentioned have had much more ripple effect than he has.
You wouldn't say at all.
Garth Ennis, The Boys. You don't think that had a ripple effect?
What do you mean? Right now, Garth Ennis is The Boys.
Yeah, that was a great ripple effect.
From what? From where?
Because it was a very impactful and it was a very, very popular thing that's still around today. It's even being commercialized now. Give me something that Bendis did that is being actually commercialized.
Well,
the MCU.
We're not going to give you that.
You're not going to give it to you, but it's actually there. So.
No, he has nothing, zero. I'll say zero now. You've pissed me off enough to say zero.
Can't write it down.
I'll tell you what.
The word zero ticks off.
That you number 14, like it or dislike it doesn't mean that there's not a ripple effect.
It's not there.
You dismissed TNT having a ripple effect because it was negative. Like, you're wrong there. Just because it's negative doesn't mean that there's no ripple effect.
A ripple effect.
That's fair point. Fair point.
Industry. You know, there is zero to see. There is zero that he's written that you've seen on the screen.
Okay, if Bendis did not write that first Spider-Man story,
stop the people in the chat, Draken.
If Bendis did not write a competent or good Ultimate Spiders universe storyline for that first one, there wouldn't be further Ultimate Spider-Mans or further
but-
Ultimate Universe lines.
Dragon, if I may interject just real quick, he does get credit for one thing. There is a TV series that came off of his powers for sure. But the thing with that I think Art is trying to tell you is that idea for the Ultimate Universe was already in play. Now, the fact that he did Ultimate Spider-Man is all well and good, but it wouldn't have mattered because they already had it planned out. Am I correct in that, Art?
Yeah, and Ultimate X-Men was a bigger hit than Ultimate Spider-Man was initially. And he didn't write Ultimate Spider-Man or X-Men.
No, and that was the book you worked on.
I worked on both of them.
Yeah. So there.
I got 2 words for you. I got 2 words for you. John Favreau.
Oh, well, let me back up. I want to give Durakin a gift here. I'm going to give you Bendis. He did have ripple effects on bringing SJW type of politics into comic books. How about
Would Ultimate X-Men exist if Ultimate Spider-Man wasn't successful?
No, they launched almost the same time.
Pretty sure they didn't.
Okay, call me a liar.
I don't know, but I'm like, based on my reading of the time, and like there's a couple hundred issues difference, but I'll look it up.
Because Ultimate Spider-Man started shipping twice a month for about a year or so. Because we were launching, or we were shipping 18 books a year versus 12. So the reason the numbers are higher on Ultimate Spider-Man than X-Men is because we were double shipping.
Ultimate Spider-Man came out a few months before Ultimate X-Men did.
Okay.
Yeah, they were close together. Yeah, there you go. There's
February 2001 versus
We're gonna have
October.
to edit the parts of this so that we can take that nonsense out.
Oh, God.
What's cracking me up is this image of Bendis.
I know. I love it. It's perfect. It's so self-absorbed.
That was perfect, Chester. That was a good
Thank
find,
you.
man.
Thank you very much.
Yes. Ripple effects on how to create non-superheroes that are focusing on, good versus evil, and how to internalize false narratives like gender and some of these other, Bendis ideas.
Yeah,
So he's like the complete mirror image of the Comics Code Authority where we started?
Possibly. we should reinstate the Comics Authority just to kind of bump Bendis a little bit.
Yeah, that's right. That's what
Right.
we do. Yeah. But anyway,
Save comic books from this type of mentality.
interesting. Now, I think there's only you guys might have other ideas, but in my brain, there's only one other topic that is to be covered on the on this ripple affecting throughout comic book history, and that's the European effect. And I think Todd might be the best person to talk about that.
Well, we talked a little bit about it with heavy metal, but go for it.
Well, unfortunately, I don't know that we've actually allowed it to happen, because what you get in the European market, regardless of style or any of that, because they have guys that are very manga inspired. They have a lot of guys that draw that Joe Madureira inspired them, so they have the looks and the styles like American comics do, but they don't do comics like we do. One, it's a bigger size. Two, it's story. You don't get the weekly continuation or the monthly continuation. You get that character, what even if he's in 5 or 6 editions of it, but you get a finished story. So you get basically what you end up getting is a graphic novel. And they call them editions or tomes or whatever they haven't quite had the effect that they should have, because I like the idea of getting something and I'm going to get a beginning, middle, and end. Not that the character dies and not that he's not having another adventure, but that my story is complete and I don't have to chase or wait or whatever for completion to it. or even a thread that gets completed by some other writer, or stuff like that. So we're in. I get what you're saying, but I don't think they've quite pushed our sensibilities over here to actually take part in what they do right, because they do some things right. The paper, the quality, all of it's hard. Most of them are hard bound. You know, they're what they're giving you is something you want to keep and put on the shelf. It's not, they don't deal in floppies.
Right.
You
I
know?
think like Marvel did that epic line for a while, and that was kind of the closest thing to kind of European comics, you know, because they were more anthologies and one and done stories, and they had different artists working on them. Marvel in the day, man, they were doing some really cool stuff. But I think the reason you're not going to see it and the ripples aren't going to affect anytime soon, but maybe actually, now I think about it, sooner than later, because of the monthly thing, because comic books have been so built up as a monthly kind of idea. And the Europeans, a lot of those guys spend a whole year developing a graphic novel, and then it comes out. So they're not done in a monthly, you know. So the structure here with Marvel and DC is completely different, where, you know, it's all based on monthly kind of product coming out. So they would have to change their entire structure of how they did comic books to embrace something like that. But where the ripples are affecting is, I think, with crowdfunding, because it's Todd, it's one of the things I'm going back more and more to, where I realize, and I think a lot of other crowdfunders are realizing they have to do one and dones, but they can't just do like 22 pages. These have to be epic stories. These have to be stories that you work a year on. You know what I mean? Like it becomes an event, and then you put it out at year's end or whatever. So then it's your opus, your magnum opus. It's your big, you know, extravaganza. And I do think it. I mean, I'm projecting here, but I do think you're going to start seeing more of that European style coming in, especially with crowdfunding. Not so much Marvel DC, but I think with crowdfunding.
I'd be happy for it. And I agree, Sonic. Jodorowsky's work is awesome. And of course, for me, when we talk about European comics, we have to talk about Jean Giraud, right? I mean, he's everything as far as that goes for me. Now that means that I'm not the most knowledgeable person on it, but all the stuff that Giraud or Giraud, however they pronounce it, has done is just ridiculous. The career of this guy, this artist, right? And there's so many titles coming out. And of course, the one I put up here, Mobius, is where it really became super famous, I think, especially with Western people. Yeah, Jean Giraud, or Giraud, however you pronounce it, that's European comics for me.
Can I tell you something?
The Lieutenant Blueberry stuff is amazing.
Yeah.
I think he was one of the first artists that I noticed would change his style for what he was doing, right? Because there's a lot of guys that do it now, but the very first artist I ever noticed to do that, go, okay, he's doing Lieutenant Blueberry. It looks a lot of like Joe Kubert, or so he did the Silver Surfer, and that looked different than his other style. You know what I mean? So I
loved his Surfer, dude.
I kept seeing him sort of do something, not without his handprint, like, because I think style is sort of a handprint, but he could push himself into different areas, and he could pull off some things that I do see. Some guys like Stuart Immonen has different styles for different types of books he does, and others like him. And he was the very first to do that, and I love that. When a guy will, you know, this style doesn't fit. Like, you want me to do that? I want to do that, but my normal style doesn't fit it, so I'm gonna have to change my balance. You know, Steve Epting, who did Velvet, changed his balance from his superhero balance to a more dramatic and cinematic look. And I think Velvet is a masterclass in that, you know? Yeah,
I agree. And he's one of the guys I look up to. He's one of the guys that inspire me, especially now that I'm in the more indie market, where I can actually take action on the ideas. And Chrono Mechanics is a big, like, big Mobius kind of influence there. I have the stuff all around my studio right now because I absolutely love it. And I do love that the idea that based on the subject matter, you change up your style. And that's exactly what I want to do with this, with my more indie work, comic work.
Would this include Asterix the Viking?
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure, dude. Asterix is a great comic, but it also brings up things like Frazetta and Vallejo. I mean, these guys are more artists, but you're going to say they didn't have a ripple effect upon comic books? My goodness, dude.
Oh, boy.
You know,
Artistically, yes.
Artistically, yes. Artistically, yeah.
Yeah, if
But,
we
I
want
mean-
to do artistic ripples, we could do that. That sounds weird, artistic ripples, but we can get into artistic ripples on maybe another stream.
Sure. But my point is that I think Europe is more important than most Americans realize. Is my only point.
I definitely agree. Like if you look at the European guys, Travis Charest was the guy that took a ton of influence from there, brought it into mainstream, and then commercialized it in mainstream comic books, and people emulated that. They were emulating Travis. I'm not even sure that they knew where Travis was getting the look from. You know what I mean? But you talk about ripples. There's an artistic ripple right there.
Yeah.
What about Stan Lee and Jack Kirby?
Well, we brought
here we
up
go.
that the Marvel universe, like in the Silver Age, so they're kind of included in that Silver Age, because what were they? 1961 was that when Marvel published Spider-Man or the Fantastic Four? Was that 60 or 61?
61, I think.
So
let me check it.
That's only 4 years after I think that DC did their more, like they revamped their characters to become more of a science-based, and I think that's what gave birth to the Silver Age. So I think they're kind of included in that Silver Age movement. I'm
thinking more in their production, because Stan Lee's writing the Stan Lee method or whatever it's called, the Marvel method rather.
Marvel way, yeah.
Like, I think that's tragic. Like people try to emulate it, and it just makes the comics and the stories more horrible because he could do that, but he had to have some sort of connection with the artist. Whereas now writers try to do that or are expected to do that, and it doesn't work.
And just to answer the question, Fantastic Four came in November of 1961, and Spider-Man came out 7 months later.
Okay.
And I would say Kirby had the influence on like working so cheaply it might have harmed the industry.
I think we should do another Pontificators on like artists and their ripple effects, because I think that would be fascinating to do something like, especially being an artist myself. And I know a lot of people here on the stream, you guys are artists and writers as well. So we could possibly do that in the future, maybe even next week, since we're kind of hot on the topic, because we should start winding down. We're at our 2-hour mark here. But this has been great, you guys. As always, this is fascinating, and we always have unexpected twists and turns. And man, Todd Mulrooney got fired up.
Yep, the list is up to 15 things that pisses off Todd.
We didn't get to talk about the influence of, and I wouldn't just, I don't want to just nail it into Dark Knight Returns. I want to talk about the influence of style that changed, because I think a lot of people started to write like Miller. Like, let's put the voice in the head, let him, he's going through broken ribs or he's coughing up blood, and we started to get inside the hero's head as he was taking a beating, and that was something people emulated.
Yeah, and then there's like metal movies and brewskis. What about Arthur Conan Doyle? Rice Burroughs and and those guys, but I think we could do 2 hours on this, definitely, like writers and artists that have changed comics and have had ripple effects. But I thought we did a pretty good job on keeping it focused. That's always
pretty much.
Yeah.
I would say that just as an aside, though, to what you talk about with Frank Miller, not to take anything away from Frank Miller, I love his stuff, but that speaking inside your own head and what's going on, for me, a lot of that was done in those old horror comics like Tales from the Crypt and classic comic stuff and those kind of things, eerie comics. There was in the horror tales, they did quite a bit of that, speaking in the detective or the person who's going through is talking to himself. Just as an aside.
You mean
Yeah.
like Dick Tracy?
Like Dick Tracy, yeah.
Yeah. Well, it's weird because, I don't want to go. I'm going to save this for next week.
Okay.
Yeah, you guys, this has been a blast. Thanks to everybody in the panel here, the Pontificators. You guys rock. This is always fun. I look forward to this every week. Fridays are a blast. And thanks to everybody in the chat for hanging out and participating. And Chester, thanks for the visuals, man. That was awesome, dude.
Oh, no problem. I'm glad I could help.
Yeah.
I'll take that position, I guess.
Yeah, well, you're quicker on the uptake with the technology than I am, so I appreciate that. So you guys want to have give your parting shots, Chester?
I think this was a fascinating conversation. I usually hope to have a little bit more comedy and especially have opportunities to sting on Todd more. But that's all right. This was more of an intellectual conversation, and I think it's a cool one because we all love comic books here. Not only people on the panel, but the people in the chat, and talking about the history of and stuff and geeking out on our nerddom is awesome, dude. So thank you guys for coming, and check us out next week.
Yes, Durakin?
Thanks for coming. I'll have a book out soon. Late February. I should have it up. FPS Agent. So.
And he colors for money. So there you go.
Yeah, I do. I might actually have a job there.
I do other things for money, Art.
I don't want to know. What are the ripple effects of Chester's other things for money? No one wants to know that.
No.
Yeah, so Todd DeWolf, what do you got going?
I just want to mention the fact that ripple effects are all around us. We're being affected by them every day, and we're affecting others every day. We got the internet at our disposal, and we can help far more. And it makes a bigger difference in people's lives if you help each other out. And there's a lot of support that goes on throughout all these independent comics that are out there throughout Indiegogo and even Kickstarter. So one small thing, one bit of support, in one area can have a huge ripple effect. Anywhere you're going in your life, try to help and support somebody, give them a hand, and it'll ripple on to somebody else. And maybe someday someone will be talking about you and the good things you've done. And that's all I want to leave with my parting shot.
Well said, man. Very well said.
Amen, brother.
Yeah. Todd Mulrooney.
Yeah, thanks for coming. You'll have to forgive Durac, and he's very young and usually very insightful. Who knows what he ate today or drank or even smoked? But don't make sure you come back next week. He'll be sure to give you more insightful comments.
Todd will take him out off the stream here.
You got to train him. Train him.
And that's it.
He's the wild card, man. He's the rogue. Yeah.
Actually, I love having Dragon here, dude, because he brings a younger perspective, right? I love it, because most of us are kind of around the same age. We're older fellas, and he's a younger guy. I like him being here. Actually,
smart, and a lot of times he's on point. But there's that occasion or that time when he says something so bizarre that you just have to forgive him because he's so youthful.
But I think all the points of view are what makes it interesting. And if we all agreed, then guess what? This would be a pretty boring stream. So
true.
Yeah. I think at one point I said somebody was wrong, like flat out.
Oh, several times you were hating on Dragon as Todd was. I wrote it down.
I wrote it down. So I apologize, man. Sometimes I get a little heated. I get a little passionate about things. So thanks everybody. If you haven't checked out, Chrono Mechanics is in demand right now. It is my labor. It is my love. and we are doing really well this week. We got a lot of backers, so I appreciate it. Thanks to everybody who's backed Chrono Mechanics, and please, if you could, shout it out. All the help, anything you can do helps. So I do appreciate that. So I think we're going to leave with this one. So I think this is aimed at you, Durakan.
At least they didn't put in the normal ending to that. Young, dung, and full of.
Well,
I was tempted.
Some question marks. So, all right, man. Well, I appreciate this. You guys had a lot of fun. So have a great weekend, and we'll see you next week on another Pontificators. So thanks, guys.
Later.